Yogi Berra, great baseball player and master of the pithy put-down, once said that prediction is hard, particularly when it's about the future. In this section, we're going to be looking at the RDM process. We're going to look at it in context. We'll look at a few other methods for thinking about the future and some of the caveats that go with it. I'm joined again by Rob. Rob, thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much. Good to be here, Ben.
Can we start by thinking a little bit about why RDM was created and the context in which it came about?
Yeah, RDM came out of a debate at the RAND Corporation in the 1980s about what to do with simulation models. You know, there's the old line about all models are wrong, but some are useful. And a key moment in that debate was when the British fleet set sail for the Falkland Islands during the Falkland War. And the people at RAND who disliked the big military simulation models that RAND was using a lot at that time ran upstairs to the room where the modelers sat and said, hey, this is your big chance. You know the British order of battle. It's on the ships. They will be at sea for a month or two. And so you know who's going to be there. The Argentines are on the island and no one's going to get on or off. So you know the Argentine order of battle. Tell us what's going to happen. And the military modelers said, no, that's not what our models are for. They're for insight, and the critics of the models say, well, that really doesn't make much sense. You know, the big models are for simple problems, but for complicated ones, you've got to rely on expert judgment or whatever. And so the key insight then was this idea of exploratory modeling that came out of this debate, that you could put the models on computers and run them many, many times. And instead of thinking of the model as a predictive device, think of it as an exploratory device, one that could explore the consequences of many assumptions. And then this idea of RDM idea of finding strategies robust over many futures came out of that insight and that debate.
Fantastic, and that's really helpful. So one of the things I think that's kind of interesting when thinking about this is how RDM differs from quite a lot of the other methods that are in common use, that people widely turn to. And perhaps it's useful just to have a little think about what some of those are. What are the other methods for thinking robustly about the future? Yeah,
so the standard set of methods, I mean, the thing that people in general mostly do, most of the sort of risk assessment policy analysis methods are predict then act methods. They're basically based on the idea of coming up with good predictions. And so often these are probabilistic. You say this future is 70% likely, this one is 30% likely, and then use that information to figure out the best thing to do today, rank your options. And that's a tremendously powerful set of tools when you have good probabilistic predictions, when those are well characterized. You can show mathematically that gives you the right answer and so forth. It's a great way to organize information. The danger with those is overconfidence. I mean, what happens if you're wrong? There's a set of scenario techniques, which in some ways are the opposite, which start out by saying, we can't predict the future, so let's look at different stories, different paths into the future. That can also be very powerful and very useful. Governments produce those, companies produce those. Shell Oil is famously associated with those. But in common practice, you produce scenarios essentially with expert judgment. Experts get together and say, this would be an interesting scenario, this would be an interesting contrast. And again, that can be great, they can be very powerful, but if the scenarios then lead you to potentially troubling or controversial solutions, people will often go back and say, hey, wait a minute, where did those scenarios come from? Are they leading us to this answer? What happens if we had a different set of scenarios? And one of the advantage, RDM is a scenario-based method, but one of the key differences is that the scenarios emerge from the analysis. So they are part of what you calculate. And therefore, you have this audit trail that says, why look at these scenarios to capture this multitude of futures as opposed to another?
And what about backcasting, for instance? That's another one that's kind of quite often used and seems to be in vogue at the moment.
Yeah, backcasting is a set of methods where you basically plant your flag in the future. Say, we can't predict the future, but we know where we would like to go, and then you work backwards and say, what do we need to do now to follow that path? And again, that can be tremendously powerful, particularly because it gives you a vision to work for that can help organize your thinking and organize a group of people thinking. A challenge there, though, is, you may, in thinking your path to the future, you may, have too narrow a vision and forget about things that may knock you off that path. And so actually RDM can be combined with sort of backcasting ideas. If you've got an idea of where you want to go, You can then do a backcast, come up with an initial plan, and then use that as a starting point for RDM and say, what happens if we are buffeted by trends we haven't quite understood? Is there still a way to get to our goal?
Fantastic. So when would you advise using RDM techniques? What's the right moment?
First off, you need to be faced with deep uncertainty. I mean, if you can characterize the future well with probabilities, you should do that. That's a simpler way to proceed. RDM is more complicated. But if you're faced with deep uncertainty, that's one important thing. The other is whether you've got a sufficient enough range of options to actually have a chance to come up with a robust strategy, one that works well over a wide range of futures. If your choice is really, either or, yes, no, binary, I do it or not, or I set a price at some level, then you're probably better off just making your best guess of the future and going from there. But if you've got a portfolio of things that you can do, you could say build levees and use natural protection, or what's often the case is that you can phase things out over time. You can take some initial actions, you can monitor for key trends and then respond, so you have a contingency plan. If you have that sort of richness in your options, then you often have a pretty good chance of coming up with a robust strategy or more robust strategy, and then RDM makes a lot of sense.
And so what are some of the times that you've used RDM processes that have been particularly sort of rich and effective?
Yeah, sort of the two marquee examples, which really put RDM on the map, were Rand's work with the 2012 Louisiana Master Plan for a Sustainable Coast, which was essentially the state's response to reconstructing the New Orleans flood defenses and managing their entire coastline post Hurricane Katrina. And Rand came in, worked with many other organizations, but was essentially the information synthesizer and used RDM and a process of deliberation with analysis to come up with what turned out to be a quite bold plan, in the sense that it was very different than anything the state had been doing previously. It passed the legislature unanimously because we could show that it dealt with uncertainty, dealt with a multiple of interests. We did a similar, that same year, 2012, worked with the federal government and the 7 state parties to the Colorado Compact, who manage the Colorado River in the western United States. And again, under very contentious and uncertain conditions, helped them come up with a plan for understanding the vulnerabilities they faced and how to move forward. And since then, we've gone into a whole variety of different activities, urban climate resilience, flood management, a lot of military procurement issues, and so forth.
Fantastic. Well, there's just a few of the areas where RDM's been used. There's lots of more examples in the reading material, so we encourage you to look at those. But for now, Rob, thank you very much, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the course.
Thank you. My pleasure.